My name is Isolde, and I just turned 32 years old. I was staring at my phone in complete shock, unable to move or breathe. After 9 years of silence, a message from my parents appeared on the screen. 9 years since they left me behind to care for my sick sister. 9 years of building a life without them, and now they wanted to reconnect. My hands trembled as I wondered what I should do. Would you like to know what happened? Let me know where you are watching from. Hit the like and subscribe buttons and join me on this emotional journey. I grew up in a beautiful suburban neighborhood just outside of Boston. Our house was a charming colonial with blue shutters and a white picket fence that my father Howard painted every spring. My mother Marissa always filled our home with fresh flowers and the smell of homemade cookies. For the first 10 years of my life, I was their only child, their princess, their world. Every Sunday, we would go on family picnics at the local park. Dad would pack sandwiches cut into perfect triangles, and Mom would bring her famous lemonade in a vintage pitcher. We would spread out a red and white checkered blanket under our favorite oak tree and spend hours playing frisbee, reading books, and simply enjoying each other's company. Those were some of my happiest memories. Summer vacations were magical too. We would drive to Cape Cod and rent the same beachfront cottage year after year. I would build elaborate sandcastles with Dad while Mom took photographs to document our creations. In the evenings, we would hunt for seashells along the shore as the sun set, turning the sky into a canvas of pink and orange. One of my favorite traditions was our nightly bedtime stories. Dad had the most animated voice, creating different characters and sound effects that would make me giggle until my sides hurt. Mom would sit at the edge of my bed, running her fingers through my hair until I fell asleep. I felt so safe, so loved. Music became my passion early on. When I showed interest in the piano at age 6, my parents immediately signed me up for lessons. They bought a beautiful upright piano that became the centerpiece of our living room. Dad would sit beside me on the bench for hours, encouraging me to practice, never showing any sign of boredom or impatience. Mom attended every recital, always in the front row, with tears of pride glistening in her eyes. My father and I shared a special bond. He would call me his little princess and leave little notes in my lunchbox with jokes or words of encouragement. On particularly difficult school days, he would surprise me with ice cream after school. We had our own secret handshake that ended with a nose boop and a giggle. I believed he hung the moon and stars just for me. Everything changed when I turned 10. Mom announced she was pregnant. I still remember the evening they told me. We were having spaghetti, my favorite meal, and they seemed unusually giddy throughout dinner. Then Dad reached for Mom's hand and said, "Isolde, how would you feel about being a big sister?" My initial reaction was a mixture of surprise and excitement. I had always wanted a sibling, someone to play with, to share secrets with. Throughout Mom's pregnancy, they constantly reassured me. "Our love for you will never change," Mom would say, rubbing her growing belly. "You will always be our first miracle," Dad would add, squeezing my shoulder. I believed them wholeheartedly. Why wouldn't I? They had never given me any reason to doubt their love. When Grace was born, she was perfect. Tiny fingers, button nose, and the softest wisps of blonde hair. I was instantly in love with my baby sister. I would sit for hours just watching her sleep, amazed that this little human was related to me. I took my role as big sister very seriously, helping change diapers, singing lullabies, and making funny faces to earn her first smiles. Our family felt complete. For the first 6 months after Grace's arrival, life was busier but still wonderful. We adjusted to our new routine, and while my parents were understandably tired from midnight feedings and diaper changes, they still made time for me. Dad still attended my piano recitals, and Mom still helped with my homework. We were happy. I had no way of knowing that our perfect world was about to collapse. The changes started subtly. Grace was around 7 months old when we first noticed something wasn't quite right. She cried constantly, not the normal baby fussiness, but gut-wrenching screams that nothing could soothe. One afternoon, while Mom was giving her a bath, Grace's tiny body suddenly went rigid. Her eyes rolled back, and she began to shake uncontrollably. I stood frozen in the bathroom doorway as Mom screamed for Dad to call 911. That was our first trip to the emergency room, but certainly not our last. After numerous tests, consultations, and a terrifying week in the pediatric ward, Grace was diagnosed with Dravet syndrome, a rare and severe form of epilepsy. I overheard the doctor explaining to my parents that this condition would cause frequent prolonged seizures, developmental delays, and potentially a host of other health problems. The prognosis was uncertain at best. I remember the look on my parents' faces when they received the diagnosis. It was as if someone had drained all the color, all the life from them in an instant. Mom collapsed into a chair, her body shaking with silent sobs. Dad stood motionless, his hand gripping the doorframe so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Even at 11, I understood that our lives had fundamentally changed. In the days that followed, I tried my best to be strong for them. I made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches when Mom forgot about lunch. I quietly did my homework without asking for help. I even learned to use the washing machine so I could do my own laundry. I wanted to be the perfect daughter, hoping that if I didn't cause any additional stress, things would somehow get better. Our home transformed into something resembling a medical facility. The refrigerator door was covered with medication schedules, doctor's appointments, and emergency contacts. The living room, once filled with books and family photographs, now housed specialized equipment for Grace's care. Her seizures could happen at any time, requiring constant vigilance. Slowly but surely, my parents' attention shifted almost entirely to Grace. It wasn't a conscious decision, I'm sure. They were simply in survival mode, dealing with one crisis after another. But for an 11-year-old girl who had been the center of her parents' world, the change was devastating. Family dinners became a rarity. Most evenings, I would heat up a frozen meal and eat alone at the kitchen table while Mom and Dad took turns feeding Grace or administering her medications. My 12th birthday came and went with just a hurried happy birthday and a store-bought cake that remained largely uneaten. My piano recital, where I performed a challenging Chopin piece I had practiced for months, had 2 empty seats in the front row where my parents should have been. I tried not to feel jealous of my sister. How could I be angry at a sick baby who had no control over her condition? But the human heart, especially a child's heart, doesn't always operate on logic. There were nights I would lie in bed, tears soaking my pillow, wondering what I had done wrong, why I wasn't enough anymore. The guilt that followed these thoughts only made me feel worse. By the time I was 13, I had become largely self-sufficient. I would wake myself up with an alarm clock, prepare my own breakfast, and catch the school bus without any reminders. I learned to forge my mom's signature on permission slips because she was too busy or too tired to look at school documents. I microwaved dinners, did my own laundry, and essentially took care of all my needs. When friends invited me to birthday parties or sleepovers, I often declined. How could I explain that my parents probably wouldn't remember to pick me up, or that I needed to be home in case Grace had a bad day, and my parents needed an extra pair of hands? I began to withdraw socially, finding solace instead in books and music. The piano became my confidant, the keys absorbing my tears and frustrations. The most painful part was seeing glimpses of the parents I once knew. Occasionally, during a rare good day, when Grace was stable, Dad would ruffle my hair like he used to, or Mom would ask about school. Those moments were like cruel teases, brief reminders of what we had lost, what I had lost. And then Grace would have another seizure, and I would become invisible again. I told myself that it was temporary, that once Grace got better, things would return to normal. But deep down, I was beginning to understand a harsh truth: nothing would ever be the same again. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could bear being the forgotten child. The day everything completely fell apart started like any other. I was 14, had just started high school, and was adapting to a new routine. I came home from school to find both my parents sitting at the kitchen table, an unusual sight, since typically at least one of them would be with Grace. Their faces were grave, and I immediately feared the worst about my sister. "Isolde, we need to talk," Dad said, his voice strained. Mom couldn't even look at me, her eyes fixed on her trembling hands. That's when they told me Grace's condition had worsened. She was now having multiple severe seizures daily, and the local hospital wasn't equipped to provide the specialized care she needed. "There's a treatment center in Arizona," Mom explained, finally meeting my gaze. "It's one of the best in the country for cases like Grace's. We've decided to move there." Relief flooded through me initially. A move would be challenging, but if it meant Grace could get better and our family could heal, I was all for it. I started mentally preparing for a new school, new friends, a fresh start for all of us. But then came the words that would haunt me for years. "Sweetheart," Dad continued, his voice breaking. "Grace needs around-the-clock care. The treatment is intensive. We need to be fully focused on her recovery." He paused, taking a deep breath. "We think it would be best if you stayed here with Grandma Eleanor." The world seemed to stop. My ears began to ring, and the kitchen around me blurred. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already understood perfectly. "It's just temporary," Mom rushed to add, though she still wouldn't meet my eyes. "Just until Grace stabilizes. You have school, your piano, your friends here, and Grandma Eleanor loves having you." "But I'm your daughter, too," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I can help with Grace. I always have." Dad reached across the table for my hand, but I pulled away. "You're 14 now, Isolde. Almost grown up. You understand that Grace needs us right now. She's just a baby, and she's very sick." "And I'm not sick enough to deserve my parents." The words burst out before I could stop them. "That's not fair," Mom said sharply, then immediately softened. "Please try to understand. This is breaking our hearts too. But Grace might not survive without this treatment. You're strong, you're healthy, you'll be fine." Fine. That word echoed in my head for years afterward, as if abandoning your teenage daughter should leave her fine. They left 2 weeks later. The morning of their departure remains one of the most painful memories of my life. The car was packed. Grace was secured in her specialized car seat, and my parents stood awkwardly on Grandma Eleanor's porch to say goodbye. Mom hugged me tightly, whispering, "We'll call every day. I promise. This won't be forever." Her tears wet my hair, and for a moment I allowed myself to believe her. Dad's hug was briefer, more restrained. "Take care of yourself, Princess," he said, using the nickname that once made me feel special, but now felt hollow. "Make us proud. We love you so much." I stood on the porch with Grandma Eleanor, watching until their car disappeared around the corner. The last thing I saw was Mom's hand waving from the passenger window. I didn't wave back. True to their word, they called that first night, and the next. We had awkward conversations where they asked about school and I asked about Grace. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the calls became less frequent. There was always a reason Grace had a bad day. They were at the hospital. They were exhausted from a new treatment protocol. Eventually, their daily calls became weekly, then monthly. Birthday cards arrived with generic messages and gift cards to stores I didn't shop at. Christmas presents came wrapped in paper I didn't recognize, chosen without any knowledge of my changing interests or needs. I sent emails that received brief replies, left voicemails that went unreturned for days. Grandma Eleanor did her best. She was kind and loving, But at 76, she wasn't prepared to raise a teenager. She didn't understand my mood swings, my music, or my growing resentment. She made me casseroles and knitted me sweaters, but she couldn't fill the gaping hole my parents had left. When I was 16, after receiving a particularly impersonal birthday card signed with a hastily scrawled, "Love Mom and Dad," I finally snapped. I called them in a fury of tears and built up anger. "You promised it would be temporary," I shouted into the phone. "It's been 2 years. You've missed everything. My first piano competition, my first date, everything." Dad tried to calm me down. "Isolde, please try to understand. Grace still needs us. Her condition is very complicated." "And what about what I need? I'm your daughter too. Please just let me come live with you. I'll help with Grace, I promise. I'll be quiet. I won't be any trouble." The silence that followed told me everything. "We just can't right now, sweetheart." Mom finally said, her voice gentle but firm. "Maybe next year, when things settle down." But things never settled down. And they didn't come for my high school graduation either. I sat in the auditorium hearing other students' families cheer as names were called, only to be met with polite generic applause when I walked across the stage. Grandma Eleanor was there beaming with pride, but the 2 empty seats beside her spoke volumes. That day, standing in my cap and gown with a diploma in hand, and no parents to photograph the moment I made a decision, if they could live without me, I would learn to live without them. If they don't need me, I don't need them. This became my mantra as I packed for college that fall. I had received a partial music scholarship to a university in Massachusetts, not too far from Grandma Eleanor, but far enough to feel like a fresh start. The day I moved into my dorm room, I made another promise to myself I would build a life so full and rich that the absence of my parents would become just a footnote in my story, not the headline. College was challenging in more ways than one. While other students called home for extra money or advice, I worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. I shelved books at the library, tutored younger students in music theory, and played piano at a local restaurant on weekend evenings. Every dollar I earned represented independence proof that I didn't need anyone's help. The first semester was lonely. I would watch roommates receive care packages and weekend visits from their parents with a mixture of jealousy and resignation. But gradually, I found my people. Jackson, a gregarious literature major who lived down the hall, adopted me into his friend group after hearing me play piano in the dorm's common room. Amelia became my roommate sophomore year, a straight-talking biology student who understood family complications having been raised by a single father after her mother abandoned them. Darius, with his quiet intelligence and wry humor, completed our quartet. These 3 became my chosen family. We studied together, celebrated birthdays, nursed each other through heartbreaks and exam stress. They never pushed when I deflected questions about my family, but they were always there when the pain became too much to bear alone. During holidays, when returning home wasn't an option for me, their families welcomed me to their tables without hesitation. Professor Larson, my piano instructor, became another pillar of support. A stern Swedish woman in her 50s, she recognized both my talent and my pain. "Music is your language," she would tell me during our lessons. "When words fail, let your fingers speak." Under her guidance, I poured my complicated emotions into Chopin nocturnes and Bach fugues. She attended every performance, offered constructive criticism and rare praise, and occasionally invited me for Sunday dinners at her apartment, where we would discuss composers over homemade meatballs. She became the mother figure I desperately needed. During my junior year, at Amelia's insistence, I started seeing a campus therapist. Dr. Winters helped me navigate the complex emotions surrounding my abandonment. "What your parents did was wrong," she said during one session, words I had needed to hear for years. "You can acknowledge that they were dealing with an impossible situation with your sister while still recognizing that they failed you. Both things can be true simultaneously." Those therapy sessions were grueling but necessary. I learned that my anger was valid, that my grief was legitimate, that the hole in my heart wasn't something to be ashamed of. Slowly, I began to unravel the knot of emotions that had been constricting my ability to truly connect with others. Still, certain days remained difficult. Mother's Day and Father's Day were particularly painful. While friends called home or posted tributes on social media, I would find myself unable to even look at my phone. Birthdays, too, were bittersweet. Each year, a card would arrive from Arizona with a check and a few lines about how proud they were of me, how much they missed me. I eventually stopped cashing the checks. After graduation, I was accepted into a prestigious music institute to pursue my master's degree. The acceptance letter sat on my desk for days as I debated whether to share the news with my parents. In the end, I sent them a brief email. Their enthusiastic response seemed almost cruel in its normalcy, as if they had a right to celebrate my achievements after contributing nothing to them. During graduate school, I met Nathan. Unlike previous dates who seemed uncomfortable with my family situation, Nathan didn't flinch when I explained that my parents were essentially strangers to me. The son of divorce, he understood complicated family dynamics and never pressed for reconciliations or reunions. Family is who shows up, he would say, a philosophy that resonated deeply with me. With Nathan's support and my growing confidence, my career began to flourish. I started teaching piano at a community music school while performing at local venues on weekends. The satisfaction of passing my love of music to young students helped heal parts of me I hadn't realized were still broken. Watching a child's face light up when mastering a difficult piece reminded me of the joy music had brought to my own troubled childhood. At 27, I saved enough for a down payment on a small apartment. The day I signed the mortgage papers was monumental. I had a home, one that was truly mine, that no one could take away from me. That evening, as Nathan and I celebrated with champagne on my new balcony, I felt a bittersweet pang. This was the kind of milestone parents should witness. But I pushed the thought away, focusing instead on this tangible proof of my resilience. It was around this time that I made the decision to completely sever what little connection remained with my parents. I changed my phone number, created a new email address, and asked Grandma Eleanor not to share my contact information with them. She reluctantly agreed, though I could see the sadness in her eyes. "They're still your parents," she said gently. "People make mistakes." 9 years isn't a mistake, I replied. It's a choice. My life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I had my teaching, my performances, my close circle of friends, and Nathan, who proposed on my 30th birthday. I had created the stability that had been ripped away from me as a teenager. Yet despite everything I had achieved, there remained a nagging emptiness, a yearning for the kind of unconditional love that only a parent could provide. I had built a full life, but the foundation still had cracks that no amount of success could completely fill. At 32, my life had found a comfortable stability. My piano students were thriving. I had regular performance gigs at upscale venues in the city, and Nathan and I were planning our wedding for the following spring. The hole left by my parents had never completely closed, but I had learned to live around it, like navigating a piece of furniture that had always been in the middle of a room. Then came the phone call that would unravel everything. Grandma Eleanor, my rock, and only family connection for the past 18 years, had passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 94, had lived a full life, and her health had been declining for months, but the loss hit me like a physical blow. She had been my constant, my one remaining link to a time when my family was whole. The funeral was small, attended mostly by Grandma's friends from church and her bridge club. I sat in the front row, clutching a handkerchief that still smelled of her lavender perfume, half expecting to see my parents walk through the church doors. They didn't come. Later, I learned they had sent flowers with a card expressing their condolences as if they were distant acquaintances rather than family. After the service, I had the daunting task of clearing out Grandma's house, the home where I had spent my teenage years. Nathan took time off work to help me, and together we sorted through decades of accumulated possessions. In her bedroom closet, I found a box labeled simply Isolde. Inside were letters, dozens of them addressed to me in my mother's familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I opened the first envelope dated shortly after they moved to Arizona. The letter inside was pages long, filled with detailed updates about Grace's treatment expressions, of how much they missed me, and promises that we would be together soon. There were more letters, each progressively shorter, but still containing affirmations of love inquiries about my life and hopes for reunion. Then I found the envelopes containing checks, many of which I had received and ignored, but many more that I had never seen. And photographs, Grace in her wheelchair, my parents looking tired, but smiling pictures of the house in Arizona with a room they said was waiting for me. None of this had ever reached me. In a separate folder were bank statements showing monthly transfers from my parents to Grandma's account, far more than would have been needed for my basic care, and medical insurance documentation indicating they had maintained coverage for me well into my 20s. The revelation was staggering. Grandma Eleanor, believing she was protecting me from further pain, had withheld much of my parents' correspondence and support. According to dates on some of the envelopes, this had begun after my heated phone call with them at 16, when I had declared I wanted nothing more to do with them. Grandma, witnessing my distress, had taken it upon herself to filter my parents from my life, showing me only the occasional card or letter that she deemed wouldn't upset me further. My emotions were chaotic. Anger at Grandma for her well-intentioned deception, confusion about what this meant about my parents' actual feelings, relief that perhaps they hadn't completely forgotten me after all. And underneath it all, a terrifying question. Had I spent years hating them for an abandonment that wasn't quite as complete as I had believed? For a month after the funeral, I grappled with these revelations, unsure what, if anything, to do with this new information. Then one ordinary Tuesday, as I was checking my professional email account, I saw a message that made my heart stop. The sender was Howard Jensen, my father. Isolde, the email began simply. I hope this reaches you. We've been trying to find a way to contact you since your grandmother's passing. An old neighbor of hers gave us this email address. There's so much to say, too much for an email. But I need to start somewhere. Grace passed away 6 months ago after a seizure that her body was too weak to recover from. She was 18. Her loss has forced your mother and I to confront the many mistakes we've made, the greatest of which was leaving you behind. We understand if you want nothing to do with us. But if there's any chance you might be willing to talk, we would be grateful for the opportunity. With love, always, Dad. I sat staring at the screen, unable to process what I had just read. Grace was gone. My sister, whom I barely knew, the person whose illness had reshaped all our lives, had died. And my parents wanted to see me. After 9 years of building my life without them, they wanted to step back in. Before I could formulate any response, another email arrived, this one from my mother. Where my father's message had been brief and direct, hers was lengthy and emotional. She wrote of regrets and sleepless nights of keeping track of my performances through online searches of the room in their house that had always been ready for me. She explained that they had sent countless messages through Grandma Eleanor, believing her assurances that she was passing everything along, never suspecting she was shielding me from them as much as them from me. She ended with a simple plea. Please give us a chance to explain in person. We don't deserve it, but we're asking anyway. I closed my laptop without replying to either message. When Nathan came home that evening, I showed him both emails without comment. His reaction surprised me. You should meet with them, he said after reading them carefully. Why? I demanded. So they can feel better about abandoning me, so they can ease their guilt now that Grace is gone, and they suddenly have room in their lives for their other daughter. Nathan took my hands in his. No, so that you can heal. You've carried this wound for most of your life, Isolde. Maybe hearing them out, saying what you need to say to their faces, will help you finally close this chapter. We argued late into the night. Nathan insisted that meeting my parents could provide closure, while I feared it would only reopen old wounds. What if they hurt me again? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. Then you'll survive it, he said simply. Just like you survived it the first time. But what if they don't? What if this is the beginning of healing, something you've needed to heal for a very long time? I didn't sleep that night, or many nights that followed. The emails remained unanswered as I wrestled with the decision. What would you gain from seeing them, Doctor? Winters asked during our emergency therapy session. I had called her immediately after receiving my parents' emails despite not having a session in nearly a year. Closure, maybe, I replied uncertainly. Or just the chance to tell them how much they hurt me to their faces. And what would you lose? I considered this. The narrative I've built. The story that I'm completely fine without them, that their absence made me stronger. Dr. Winters nodded. Both those things can still be true even if you see them. Meeting them doesn't invalidate the life you've built or the strength you've developed. She paused thoughtfully. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't walking away, but walking towards something that scares us with our eyes wide open. My friends were divided on the issue. Amelia was firmly against the meeting. They don't deserve your time, she said fiercely over wine at our weekly dinner. They abandoned you when you needed them most. Why give them the satisfaction of forgiveness? Jackson was more measured. People make terrible mistakes, especially when they're in crisis. Maybe they truly didn't understand the impact of their decision. It doesn't excuse what they did, but it might explain it. Darius, always the most philosophical of the group, suggested, consider meeting them not for their sake, but for yours. Unresolved relationships have a way of haunting us, even when we think we've moved past them. For weeks, I oscillated between rage at the audacity of their request and a quiet, persistent curiosity about who they had become, these strangers who had once been the center of my world. I reread their emails countless times, analyzing every word for hidden meanings or manipulations. I reviewed the letters and documents found at Grandma Eleanor's, trying to piece together the full picture of the past 9 years. One afternoon, while practicing a particularly challenging Rachmaninoff piece, I had a moment of clarity. The same hands that struggled with this complex music had once been too small to reach an octave on the keyboard. I had grown, evolved, mastered difficulties that once seemed insurmountable. I was no longer the vulnerable 14-year-old they had left behind. I was a woman with a career, a fiancé, a life built on my own terms. What power could they possibly have over me now? That evening, I replied to both emails with a single message. I'm willing to meet, once. I make no promises beyond that. Their responses came almost immediately, expressing gratitude and suggesting dates and locations. After some back and forth, we agreed to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe in Boston, halfway between my home and their hotel. I insisted that the meeting be limited to 1 hour and made it clear that Nathan would be nearby if I needed support. In the days leading up to the meeting, I prepared meticulously, not just emotionally, but practically. I wrote down every question I wanted answered, every hurt I needed acknowledged. I chose my outfit carefully, a professional dress that projected confidence and success. I even rehearsed potential scenarios with Nathan, trying to anticipate and prepare for any emotional manipulation. The morning of the meeting arrived with an unexpected sense of calm. Whatever happened today, I told myself I would leave, knowing I had faced my past with courage and dignity. Nathan drove me to the cafe, squeezing my hand reassuringly before I exited the car. I'll be right outside, he promised. Just text if you need me to come in or if you want to leave. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a table near the back with a clear view of the door. I ordered a cappuccino that I couldn't bring myself to drink, watching the foam dissolve as the minutes ticked by. And then, at exactly the appointed time, they walked in. My first thought was how old they looked. My father's once dark hair was now silver, his tall frame slightly stooped. My mother, who had always taken pride in her appearance, seemed diminished somehow, her face lined with grief and exhaustion. They scanned the room anxiously until their eyes found me, and the recognition that passed over their faces was almost painful to witness. They approached slowly, as if afraid I might flee. "Isolde," my mother whispered, her voice breaking on my name. Her hands twitched at her sides, clearly wanting to reach for me, but restraining herself. "Thank you for agreeing to see us," my father said formally, as if addressing a business associate rather than his daughter. I gestured to the chairs across from me. "Please sit." My voice came out steadier than I expected, betraying none of the emotional turmoil beneath. An awkward silence descended as they settled into their seats. We all ordered coffee that none of us would finish. Finally, gathering my courage, I spoke. "I have questions, a lot of them, and I need honest answers, not excuses or justifications." They nodded in unison. "Anything," my mother said. "We'll tell you anything you want to know." And so, I began. I asked about their decision to leave me behind, about the promises they had made and broken, about the graduations and birthdays they had missed. I asked about Grace's life and death. I asked why their calls had become so infrequent, why they hadn't insisted on seeing me at least occasionally. They answered each question without defensiveness. They explained the overwhelming nature of Grace's care, the financial strain of her treatments, the constant fear that she might not survive another seizure. They admitted to being so consumed by crisis that they lost perspective on the damage they were causing me. They confessed that what was meant to be temporary became easier to maintain than to change, that inertia and exhaustion kept them from making the difficult decision to reunite our family. "We thought we were doing what was necessary for Grace," my father explained, his voice thick with emotion. "But we now understand that we were making choices based on fear and desperation, not love and wisdom." "We failed you," my mother added simply. "There's no excuse for that. We could tell you about the thousands of seizures, the hospitalizations, the nights without sleep, but none of that justifies abandoning our firstborn child." Their honesty was disarming. I had expected denials or rationalizations, not this raw acknowledgement of their failings. But one question continued to burn in my heart, one I had wondered about for nearly 2 decades. "Why didn't you take me with you?" I asked, my voice finally betraying my pain. "I wasn't just your daughter on paper. I loved you. I needed you. Why wasn't I important enough to keep—" The cafe around us seemed to fall silent as my question hung in the air. My father's eyes filled with tears, and my mother reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. "You were always important enough," she said, her voice breaking. "The truth is, we weren't strong enough. We were drowning in Grace's care and medical bills and fear. We convinced ourselves that leaving you with Grandma Eleanor was the stable, responsible choice. That uprooting you from school and friends would be selfish when we could barely function ourselves. We told ourselves that you would be happier with a normal life," my father continued, than witnessing the daily trauma of Grace's condition. "But that was our fear, talking, not our love." He paused, taking a shuddering breath. "The hardest truth, Isolde, is that we took the easier path. Caring for both of you felt impossible in our exhausted state, so we made a choice that haunts us every day. Their admission struck me with unexpected force. All these years I had imagined complex justifications, believed they had somehow convinced themselves that abandoning me was right. The simple confession of human weakness of taking the easier path was both more understandable and more devastating. I needed my parents. I said, my voice quiet but firm. No matter how difficult it would have been, I needed you. Do you have any idea what it's like for a child to realize they're not worth fighting for? My mother wiped tears from her cheeks. We don't expect forgiveness, Isolde. We know the damage we've caused can't be undone with an apology or an explanation. We just wanted you to know that our failure wasn't because we didn't love you. It was because we weren't the parents you deserved. For the first time since they arrived, I truly looked at them beyond my anger and hurt. I saw two broken people who had made a catastrophic mistake, who had lost one daughter to illness and another to their own flawed choices. There was no triumph in their suffering, no vindication in seeing their pain. They were simply human, fallible, in the most devastating way. Tell me about Grace, I said suddenly, surprising even myself with the request. I barely knew my own sister. The tension at the table shifted as they shared stories of Grace, of her rare smiles, her love of music, how she would calm during her worst episodes when they played recordings of my piano recitals. They spoke of her courage, her silent endurance of treatments and tests. And they spoke of her death, peaceful in her sleep, after years of struggle. As they talked, I began to understand the impossible situation they had been in, though understanding didn't erase the hurt. I could see how two otherwise loving people could make a decision that would cause such profound damage. It didn't excuse their actions, but it made them comprehensible in a way they hadn't been before. Our scheduled hour extended to 2, then 3. We ordered lunch that went mostly untouched. Nathan texted several times to check on me, and I assured him I was okay, that I needed to see this through. As afternoon faded toward evening, I finally asked the question that had brought us together. What do you want now? Why reach out after all this time? They exchanged glances before my father spoke. We want whatever you're willing to give us, Isolde. A chance to know the remarkable woman you've become. An opportunity to be in your life in whatever capacity you'll allow. He hesitated. We know we have no right to ask, but we're asking anyway. We understand if the answer is no, my mother added. We would accept that, but we couldn't live with ourselves if we didn't at least try to make amends. I considered their request carefully. I can't promise anything, I finally said. I've built a life without you. I'm engaged to a wonderful man. I have a career I'm proud of. I'm not the girl you left behind waiting for you to return. We wouldn't want you to be, my father said softly. We just want to know who you are now, if you'll let us. We agreed to meet again in a few weeks after I'd had time to process everything. This time, Nathan would join us a step toward integrating them into my current life if I decided that was what I wanted. We exchanged contact information, and as we prepared to leave, my mother hesitantly asked if she could hug me. I wasn't ready for that level of physical connection, but I offered my hand instead. She took it in both of hers, tears streaming down her face. My father stood nearby, respecting my boundaries, but clearly aching for contact. In his eyes, I caught a glimpse of the man who had once called me his princess, who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with math homework. That recognition was both painful and healing. As I walked to where Nathan was waiting in the car, I felt lighter somehow, as if I had set down a burden I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I wasn't ready to forgive them, not yet, but I had taken the first step on a path that might eventually lead there. The months that followed our first meeting were a delicate dance of boundaries and tentative connections. True to my word, I introduced Nathan to my parents 2 weeks later. He was gracious, but protective, making it clear through subtle signals that his loyalty lay firmly with me. My mother brought photo albums of Grace, sharing the sister I never truly knew, while my father asked thoughtful questions about my music career and our wedding plans. These initial meetings were awkward, filled with careful conversation and the weight of unspoken history. We were like actors, following a script, all politeness and restraint. But gradually, as we continued to see each other every few weeks, moments of authentic connection began to emerge. A shared laugh over a childhood memory. My mother's genuine interest in my teaching methods. My father's pride when I mentioned an upcoming performance. I maintained firm boundaries. I didn't share intimate details of my life or emotions. I declined invitations to visit their home in Arizona. I kept our meetings in public places where I felt safe and in control. They respected these limits without question, grateful for whatever access to my life I was willing to permit. The turning point came 3 months after our reunion. I had a major piano recital at a prestigious venue in Boston, performing a challenging program of Liszt and Debussy. Without telling them, I had reserved 2 tickets. The morning of the performance, I texted them the details with a simple message: "If you'd like to come." No pressure, no expectations. That evening, as I peeked through the curtains before going on stage, I saw them sitting in the front row, just as they had for my childhood recitals. My mother wore a beautiful blue dress she had mentioned buying specially for the occasion, while my father nervously adjusted his tie, scanning the program with intense concentration. Something shifted inside me as I performed that night. Every piece, every note was infused with the complex emotions of our shared history. The Liszt was my anger and grief, the Debussy, my tentative hope. When I played the encore, a simple Chopin nocturne that had been my father's favorite when I was young, I saw him wipe tears from his eyes. After the performance, they waited with the other audience members to congratulate me. My mother handed me a bouquet of lilies, my childhood favorite, that I hadn't mentioned in our recent interactions. She must have remembered from before. My father, usually so reserved, embraced me spontaneously, whispering, "You are always extraordinary. I'm sorry I missed watching you become this magnificent artist." That night marked a subtle but significant change in our relationship. I began to see them not just as the parents who had abandoned me, but as complex individuals who had made devastating mistakes and were genuinely trying to make amends. They weren't asking me to forget or excuse the past, only to allow for the possibility of a different future. As my wedding approached, Nathan and I faced the question of their role in the ceremony. After much soul-searching and many conversations with Dr. Winters, I made a decision that surprised even me. I asked my father to walk me down the aisle, not because I had forgiven everything, but as a symbol of the healing journey we had begun. The day he came for the final suit fitting, we found ourselves alone in the waiting area of the tailor's shop. "Are you sure about this, Isolde?" he asked quietly. "I don't want you to feel obligated." "I'm not doing this for you," I replied honestly. "I'm doing it for me. For the girl who used to believe her dad hung the moon and stars. She deserves this moment." He nodded, understanding both the gift and the boundary I was establishing. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of it," he promised. My wedding day was bittersweet in many ways. As my father walked me down the aisle, I felt the weight of the years we had lost. But I also felt a lightness, a sense that by including them in this milestone, I was reclaiming parts of myself that had been fractured by their absence. My mother's tears as she watched us, Nathan's supportive squeeze of my hand as I joined him at the altar, the gentle way my father placed my hand in my soon-to-be husband's, all created a tapestry of healing that I hadn't known was possible. In the years that followed, our relationship continued to evolve. There were still difficult days, moments when old resentments surfaced, or when a casual comment would trigger painful memories. There were heated arguments when the past would erupt into our careful present, forcing us to confront issues we had skirted around. But there were also genuine connections, new memories being formed, alongside the acknowledgement of what had been lost. My parents moved back to Massachusetts to be closer to me, a gesture that spoke volumes about their commitment to rebuilding our relationship. They never pressured me for more than I was ready to give, accepting with grace the times I needed distance and cherishing the moments of closeness. When my first child was born, I watched them become grandparents with a mixture of joy and caution. As they held my daughter with such tenderness, I made them promise that history would not repeat itself, that this child would always know their unconditional love. They made that vow with tears in their eyes, understanding the depth of what I was asking. Looking back now, I can see that forgiveness wasn't a single moment or decision. It was a process, a daily choice to allow healing rather than cling to hurt. It didn't mean forgetting what had happened or pretending it hadn't damaged me. It meant accepting that the past couldn't be changed, but the future wasn't yet written. The most profound lesson I learned through this journey was that forgiveness wasn't primarily about them, it was about me. It wasn't about excusing their actions, but about refusing to let those actions define me or limit my capacity for joy. Every time I chose connection over resentment, I wasn't giving them a gift, I was giving one to myself. Our relationship today isn't what it would have been if they had never left. That relationship died the day they drove away, and we couldn't resurrect it. Instead, we built something new, something that acknowledged both the pain of the past and the possibility of the present. It isn't perfect, but it's authentic, and there is healing in that authenticity. For those of you who might be struggling with similar wounds, I won't offer platitudes about time healing all or the power of forgiveness. What I will say is this: you get to choose what role your pain plays in your story. You can let it be the defining chapter, or you can let it be one thread in a much richer tapestry. The people who hurt you don't get to decide that. Only you do. My parents failed me in profound ways, but recognizing their humanity didn't diminish the reality of that failure. It simply allowed me to see that even broken relationships can contain threads of love, and sometimes those threads are worth salvaging, not for the sake of those who hurt us, but for our own peace. What ultimately matters more to you, holding on to your pain or finding your peace? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and transformation. And if you're going through something similar right now, remember that your story isn't over yet. Thank you for listening, and I wish you courage on your own path to healing.